Warning: the following story contains brief mentions of child abuse and child neglect. Dilapidated, a Creepy Conceptions original. Artwork by Kanarushi. Come on! I shouted excitedly at my girlfriend, Zuri, slamming the car door behind me while I hurried over to her side to take her hand. I'm coming, geez, babe. She giggled as I pulled her along the grass. I pulled out my phone to look at the temporary code that would unlock the box that held the key to the door. After dating for 6 months, I was finally going to be able to introduce Suri to my now COVID-vaccinated parents. Being back in my hometown was like a breath of fresh air after such a difficult year, especially for those working in healthcare like me and Zuri. But during that year, I had met someone that I was rapidly falling for, and it made life beautiful. When I was 10, my parents had decided to sell the house I had spent my entire life in and move to a different neighborhood in a different school zone. I was in fifth grade. It was a difficult year without my friends. I eventually got over it, especially when I graduated to middle school, where friendship circles were not already so tightly woven, but I had hated it at first. I think it was because of this that the house before us had always held a special place in my heart, and I wanted to share it with her, like I wanted to share everything with her. I planned to just drive in front of it and show her around the neighborhood, but when I saw the open house sign in the front yard, I knew we had to go in. I wasn't surprised to find that it was much smaller than I remembered. That's normally how it goes for places you haven't visited since childhood. The carpet had turned to hardwood, and the wall that separated the living room from the kitchen was now a half wall. I took Zuri upstairs through the door closest to the stairs and into the smallest bedroom. I smiled to Zuri as she looked around. She walked across to the single window that sat in the middle of the far wall and gazed out into the backyard. I saw that there was a new shed at the corner by an even newer dog-eared fence that separated the property from the outside world. I remembered it being a chain link fence when I lived here. The lawn was freshly mowed to further entice potential buyers. I wrapped my arms around Zuri, resting my chin on her shoulder and allowing my vision to adjust to the old house beyond the fence. Wait, that's not right. Zuri must have felt me stiffen because she asked me if everything was okay. That house, it looks wrong. The house I remembered was an older style, definitely, but it was definitely well kept. The grass was neatly cut, the horizontal siding a soft ivory, and the back porch had intact wood with several rocking chairs. There were wide steps leading down to the backyard. The overall shape was rectangular, wide, and it had 2 stories with several windows. I don't really remember how many, but I remember it being a boarding house for children who had nowhere to go. The building I was looking at was dilapidated, dark gray, and barely standing. Parts of the roof had caved in. Several windows were broken, there was graffiti everywhere, and the backyard was dark and dead and littered with garbage. There were several no trespassing signs, and I could see that the chain link fence now wrapped around to the front. It was tall and had barbed wire at the top. It reminded me of the fences around power plants. I described to Zuri what I remembered from when I was 10, and she voiced my thoughts before I said them. There's no way that house could wind up in that condition in just 15 years, she said. Instead of continuing the tour, I went downstairs and opened the small door that led into the backyard. Zuri followed closely behind me as I went. That fence wasn't there before, I told her as I reached it. I put my hands on the wooden fence and pulled myself up to see the house. It looked hideous and frightening, and it made my heart race. It felt so wrong, so very wrong. I let myself down as Zuri offered to put me on her shoulders so that I could get a closer look. I declined, moving away from the fence and fishing my phone out of my jacket. I didn't want to look at that house again. Instead, I called my mom. Hi, sweetie. Are you close? There was a rustling noise in the background. I heard my dad talking to her. Yeah, She cut me off. Jenny, I'm sorry, honey. Can I call you back once we get the groceries put away? It will only take a few minutes. Yes, of course. Just call me back as soon as you can. Is everything okay? You sound a little spooked. Everything is fine. Just call me back, okay? She hesitated. Okay, give me just a minute, okay? She hung up, and Zuri and I made our way back inside the house. I locked the back door and sat up on the kitchen counter. Zuri could read the worry on my face, and she quickly hugged me as she waited for me to explain the reason behind my level of distress. That house was in perfect condition. It actually looked almost brand new. It was a boarding house for foster kids and orphans. One of the worst things about moving was losing my best friend. The kids weren't allowed to leave the campus, but she would come to the fence all the time and we would talk to each other. It was great since she didn't have much to do. I missed her a lot. Maybe they moved away because of the condition, and I just didn't realize how bad of a shape the building had been in before. Zuri nodded in agreement. It's obviously condemned now. I'm surprised they haven't torn it down already. Just then, my phone rang. I picked up immediately. Hey, Mom. Hey, honey. What's going on? Are my girls okay? Yeah, let me put you on speaker. I then explained to her that we were at our old home since I had wanted to show Zuri part of where I grew up, and that we were able to get inside because of the open house. She started to sound worried even before I mentioned the building behind the house, but when I did... Genevieve, darling, that house was actually a major part of the reason we moved away. The house has always looked like that. It hasn't changed much over the years, save for the new fence they put around it to keep any hooligans out. The house couldn't possibly have looked like that. But it did. We don't know why you were so obsessed with that thing. You would always sit by the fence. You would be out there for hours. Because Olive always said she had no one else to talk to. Your imaginary friend? I paused. Imaginary? There was no way she had been imaginary. No way at all. Oh, sweetie. My mother proceeded to tell us both the events that led up to us moving out. We had stayed in a hotel for almost a month before our new house was ready. Apparently, I would sit and stare at the abandoned house for hours, talking to myself. I always told my parents I was talking to my friend Olive, and they always assumed I had an imaginary friend. But my imaginary friend became jealous. She always wanted me to spend time with her instead of my real-life friends, since she had no one to talk to and no one to play with. I didn't realize how odd it was, but I don't remember ever seeing anyone else on that property. I became reclusive, and I would throw tantrums if I was made to do anything other than go outside to talk to my friend. I even tried to get out of going to a birthday party so that I could sit and stare at that house. Eventually, it escalated to a point where I was waking up with my feet covered in dirt, and there was dirt on the bed. Sometimes I would wake up on the couch. My parents started taking turns staying up, and it was my dad that caught me sleepwalking out to the house to sit by the fence. They put a little alarm on my door and would quickly come get me whenever it went off. One day, exhaustion took over and my dad dozed off on the couch. My mom didn't hear the alarm. A nightmare shook my dad awake, and he went to the kitchen to refill his coffee mug. That's when he saw that the kitchen door was wide open. He managed to grab me just as I was about to jump down to the other side of the chain link fence having climbed it to the point where I was already trying to gain footing on the other side. I screeched and protested as he dragged me back in. The next day, we moved out, and we never came back. The land was considered dangerous and cursed, and the current owners refused to sell it for fear of what could happen to anyone who bought it. They didn't tear the house down. The house couldn't be destroyed, they said. No one knew why, but the city had forced them to get a more reliable fence to keep people from venturing onto the property. By the time my mom hung up the phone, I was nauseated and dizzy. I felt wrong. I felt sick to my stomach. I wanted nothing more than to remove myself from the situation immediately. All of my memories of my friend began to turn sour. She was demanding, I remembered. She was always angry. She never smiled. She was always trying to convince me to go into the house with her, to sneak out when my parents weren't paying attention. Thankfully, they always were. I don't know what that house or that entity wanted with me, and I wanted nothing more than to leave this place behind and never come back. Zuri wound up driving the rest of the way to my parents' house, holding my hand in silence. I eventually learned, through Zuri's curiosity, that the building had been shut down in the 1930s for deplorable conditions. Apparently, many parents would also drop off unwanted children there. Children who were sick or disabled, especially during the Great Depression of the 1930s. Many of the children were abused, and when the abuse and neglect led to the death of a small young girl, the place was shut down and the children shipped out to different places. That's why Olive was so lonely, I guess. Olive, with her midnight green button-down dress, white socks, and perpetually untied faded gray Oxford shoes. Olive, with her short, light brown, curly hair kept back by a thin band around her head. She was the only one to die there, so she had no one to play with. She didn't want to be alone anymore. That's what she had always said to me. She wanted me to join her so that we could be friends forever. It terrifies me that I was so close to making it to the other side of the fence and being stuck with her forever. I'm so thankful that I never did, but I still get shivers down my spine whenever I think about it. And that concludes our story for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Please remember to like if you like, comment, share, and subscribe. I am looking to put out content on a regular basis, and I would love to know what my listeners are thinking. If you would like to commission brilliant and amazing artwork by the very talented and skillful Kanarushi, you can email her at commissions@kanarushistudios.com. If you have any prompt requests, you can send them to stories@creepyconceptions.com. I write all of my own stories, and I am always looking to flex my creative muscles. I also write my own music, which is free to use if you give me credit. You can email me at the same email, stories@creepyconceptions.com, and I will send it to you in WAV format. Thank you again for joining us, and as always, stay creepy, my lovelies.